Hey everyone. So, have you ever really stopped to think about how the American colonies managed to govern themselves? I mean, they were separated by this massive ocean from their king. It's not like it happened overnight. It was almost like a recipe with a few really key ingredients that bigged up something totally new. Let's break down that recipe.
Okay, just imagine for a second. You're a colonist back in the 1600s. You're in this brand new, totally wild land. You've got to have rules, right? You need some kind of order. But the person who's supposed to be in charge, the king, is literally an ocean away. So how on earth do you build a government?
From 3,000 miles away? That right there was the fundamental problem. The central question that the early English settlers had to answer. And their answer would, well, change the course of history. 3,000 miles of just open ocean. And that's not just a number. It was this enormous barrier. If you sent a message to the king, it could take months to get there. An answer? Months more to get back. That distance, more than anything else, was what forced the colonists to start making their own calls.
So, our first ingredient in this whole recipe for self-rule is really just that, the problem of distance. With the king being so incredibly far away, just basic survival meant they had to create their own rules. They had to figure out how to keep the peace and build some kind of order in their towns. It wasn't a choice, it was a necessity.
But here's the thing, they weren't starting from absolute zero. The colonists brought a really critical second ingredient with them from back home. You could think of it as the seed of an idea from the old world. I mean, at the end of the day, they were still Englishmen, and they were super familiar with the idea of having a say in their own government. This whole concept of a parliament, a group of elected representatives making laws, that was basically baked into their political DNA. And you can literally see a straight line from their old world to the new one. They took that English model of parliament and just adapted it. They created their own local versions called General Assemblies. It was like they were planting a familiar seed, but in brand new soil. And it started to grow almost immediately.
So, with that seed of an idea planted, it was time for some real-world experiments. I mean, the colonists didn't just sit around talking about these concepts. They put them into practice pretty much the second they arrived.
And two of the most famous examples show you just how fast this happened. Think about it. Before the Pilgrims even got off the boat, they signed the Mayflower Compact. It was this simple but totally revolutionary promise to govern themselves. And then down in Virginia, you've got the House of Burgesses, the very first elected legislature in any of the English colonies. These weren't just town hall meetings, these were the first real sprouts of American democracy. Okay, now for a really fascinating, kind of ironic ingredient, the king's neglect. Yeah, for a long time, England basically just left the colonies to do their own thing. And it turns out that was one of the absolute best things that could have possibly happened to them. This whole policy actually has a formal name, salutary neglect. And that word salutary is key. It just means beneficial or healthy. It was this unofficial, hands-off approach from Britain that pretty much allowed the colonies to grow up on their own without constant meddling from the king. The best way to think about it is like a parent teaching a kid to ride a bike and then finally letting go. The neglect was salutary. It was good for them because it forced the colonies to find their own balance. Sure, they probably wobbled, fell a few times, but in the end, they learned how to steer for themselves. They got strong, they got confident, and they got really used to their freedom.
All right, the final ingredient, the thing that turned all of this practical experience into a full-blown philosophy, was a spark of incredible new ideas that were crossing the Atlantic from Europe. It was a time we now call the Enlightenment.
You had these brilliant thinkers, guys like John Locke, who were just completely changing the whole conversation about government. He was out there arguing that your rights don't come from a king. They're natural. They belong to you just because you're human. I mean, this was a bombshell of an idea, and it absolutely caught fire in the colonies. So what these ideas did, really, was give the colonists a powerful new language to describe what they were already doing. The idea that a government's job is to protect your life, your liberty, and your property, and that it should be guided by what the people want, well, that became the intellectual bedrock of their new American identity. So what happens when you mix all of this stuff together? You've got the distance, the English traditions, the king's healthy neglect, and that powerful spark of Enlightenment thought. Well, you get a uniquely American result. Let's recap the recipe. You start with the necessity that comes from being so far away. You mix in a solid foundation of English political tradition. You let that simmer and strengthen with a big dose of royal neglect, and then, boom, you hit it with the philosophical spark of the Enlightenment. And the final product wasn't just about making local laws anymore. It was a deep, fundamental shift in how they saw the world. Over 150 years, the colonists had built an entire culture based on this radical, powerful belief that people should have a voice in their own destiny. Which, of course, brings us to the big final question. After more than a century of learning to ride that bike all on their own, what do you think would happen if the parents suddenly came running back, grabbed the handlebars, and tried to steer? Now that is a story for another time.